Step onto a Dubai sidewalk at 1 p.m. in August, and it looks like a multi-billion-dollar ghost town. The pavement is baking at 45 degrees Celsius, and the massive waterfront promenades are entirely abandoned. But this visual silence hides a brutal economic reality. Dubai has poured billions of dollars into world-class outdoor infrastructure, attractions that rely on massive, constant foot traffic to survive. Yet, for several months every year, the extreme environment makes stepping outside physically dangerous, essentially threatening to burn up a massive portion of their tourism economy. And here is the impossible paradox. Despite this physical barrier, Dubai is currently processing nearly 20 million international visitors a year. So, how does a tourism empire avoid total financial collapse when the sun effectively shuts down the outside world? The answer is not just better air conditioning. It is a radical, highly engineered redesign of how human beings interact with space, architecture, and time itself. The visual silence of an exposed street is deeply deceptive. It suggests a destination that has simply been left behind. But the official data completely contradicts what you see on the pavement. Dubai recorded 19.59 million international overnight visitors in 2025. That is not a collapsed tourism market. That is one of the highest visitor volumes on the planet. The airport terminals are actively processing massive waves of arrivals. The hotel rooms are still holding luggage and processing new guests. The city continues to receive enormous volumes of international travelers even as the peak summer heat sets in. If nearly 20 million people are cycling through this infrastructure, the empty promenades cannot be explained by a sudden lack of demand. The visitors are physically inside the city limits, but they are systematically absent from the outdoor environment during specific windows of time. The initial assumption is that extreme weather stops tourists from coming altogether. The reality is far stranger. To solve the mystery of the quiet outdoor streets, you cannot just look at the calendar. You have to look at the clock. They are fully participating in the local economy, but their physical footprint has dramatically shifted. Summer travel guidance for the region identifies the hours between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. as especially unforgiving for prolonged outdoor exposure. During this specific 5-hour window, sunlight intensifies and the outdoor environment changes from an attraction into a physical barrier. At 9 a.m., outdoor exploration is entirely possible. By 10 a.m., the waterfronts are still relatively active with morning pedestrians. But as the clock approaches midday, the foot traffic begins to drop sharply. By 1 p.m., the primary way to experience the outdoor city safely is from the back of an air-conditioned taxi. The outdoor day becomes heavily compressed. The first thing extreme heat takes from a tourist is not necessarily the holiday. It is control over the schedule. You can no longer wander spontaneously down a random street just to see what is there. Every movement must be calculated against the rising temperature outside. The afternoon essentially becomes a waiting game. Outdoor activity simply pauses, holding its breath until the sun begins to lower and the pressure finally breaks. Only after sunset does the outdoor city reboot. The sheer physical limitation forces a structural reorganization of time. A visitor who might normally spend 8 continuous hours exploring multiple districts must now slice their itinerary into entirely separate morning and evening segments. But human behavior is only one side of the equation. Sometimes the tourist is not the first thing to retreat. When the sun exposure reaches its absolute peak, the tourism infrastructure itself has to adapt. A tourist can rearrange one afternoon. An outdoor attraction may rearrange an entire season. Major open-air destinations like Dubai Miracle Garden, Global Village, and Dubai Safari Park undergo scheduled seasonal closures when the summer heat settles in. Current reporting for 2026 notes these massive operations wrap up their outdoor seasons right as the most intense weather approaches. You will find locked gates and closed signs at locations that normally process thousands of visitors a day. The ticketing areas sit completely empty. The vast garden pathways and massive outdoor event spaces are left exposed to the direct sun. This is not a failure of the business model. It is a calculated operational retreat. maintaining large-scale, fully exposed outdoor entertainment during peak summer conditions becomes physically and economically impossible. The environment temporarily reclaims the space. The infrastructure yields to the climate, effectively erasing major items from the daytime itinerary to wait for the cooler months to return. The city physically retracts its open-air footprint, preserving its resources until the temperature boundary shifts again. It is a massive spatial shift, hidden in plain sight. To understand exactly what that operational shift means, on a personal level, you have to follow the tourist. Step out of a hotel exit during the peak afternoon pressure zone. The initial blast of heat hits your skin the second you leave the lobby. Your walking pace immediately changes. You instinctively scan the pavement for the closest shadow cast by a skyscraper or an overpass. A short outdoor walk that would be a pleasant stroll in December becomes a purely mechanical task in August. The asphalt radiates heat upward, matching the direct sunlight beating down from above. You quickly hail a passing taxi. The car door closes, sealing you back inside a heavily refrigerated environment. As the vehicle moves, you watch the quiet, sun-bleached sidewalk slide past the tinted window. The physical experience of navigating the city transforms completely. You begin the day looking for famous landmarks or scenic views. Later, you begin looking for the next air-conditioned doorway. The urban journey is no longer about moving freely from destination to destination. It becomes an exercise in moving safely from one climate-controlled bubble to another climate-controlled bubble. The outdoor streets are no longer places to gather or explore. They are simply hot, exposed gaps that you must cross as quickly as possible to reach the next interior space. The taxi pulls up to a covered drop-off zone. You step out of the vehicle and walk rapidly toward the massive automatic glass doors of a mall entrance. The sliding doors open, and the quiet instantly shatters. You step into a massive wall of noise, movement, and thousands of people. The Dubai Mall, the indoor restaurants, and the vast entertainment centers are operating at full capacity. This is the other half of the summer reality. The visual contrast is deeply jarring. The tourists who vanished from the midday sidewalks are right here. Official tourism material actively promotes these massive interior spaces as the primary way to navigate the hottest months. The indoor ice rinks, deep water aquariums, and heavily air-conditioned retail avenues absorb the immense foot traffic that the outdoor city temporarily cannot support. The people did not disappear. They crossed a climate boundary. They traded an exposed urban environment for an engineered one. Inside these megastructures, the extreme weather is effectively neutralized. The temperature remains locked at a comfortable constant, allowing the retail and entertainment economy to function without any interruption. Thousands of visitors can spend the entire afternoon walking for miles without ever feeling the 45-degree heat just on the other side of the glass. But this mass migration behind sealed doors creates a completely new geographical problem. An indoor aquarium or a retail concourse can easily absorb massive waves of afternoon visitors, but not everything Dubai sells to tourists can fit behind those doors. The city must find a way to maintain its most famous outdoor assets while the sun remains highly aggressive. There is a strict physical limit to what can be air-conditioned. A coastline cannot retreat into a shopping center. The rolling dunes of a desert experience remain completely exposed to the afternoon sun, and a sprawling urban sidewalk cannot suddenly be enclosed in glass. These are core components of the tourism economy that simply cannot hide from the extreme heat. They are physically anchored to the outdoor environment. Indoor Dubai can absorb the crowds. Outdoor Dubai has to negotiate with the clock. The attractions that cannot move indoors must find a different way to survive the peak daylight hours. They cannot rely on heavy refrigeration systems or sealed architectural borders to protect their visitors. Instead, they must rely on the precise timing of their operations. If the physical space cannot change, the way that space is used has to change. The entire operational model must become incredibly flexible. And you can see that structural shift happening right now in how the city reorganizes basic human movement during the most difficult parts of the day. The challenge shifts from building better air conditioning to fundamentally redesigning the schedule of the city itself. Time becomes the ultimate tool for survival. During the cooler months, a tourist might go for a long morning run along the marina or walk extensively through an open-air historical district. In extreme summer conditions, even basic physical exercise requires an engineered solution. Consider the second Dubai Marathon in 2026. This massive city initiative runs across 6 major malls, providing safe, air-conditioned environments for walking, running, and related physical activity throughout the summer season. It is not a program designed exclusively for tourists, but it reveals a profound shift in how the city operates under pressure. A shopping mall normally imitates certain functions of a city, but under intense summer conditions, indoor Dubai begins performing functions normally associated with outdoor public space. The wide corridors of a retail center become the new running tracks and pedestrian promenades. The climate boundary you crossed earlier is no longer just a place to escape the sun. It has become a temporary replacement for the street itself. People are using the commercial infrastructure to simulate the basic civic experience of walking through a neighborhood. The indoor spaces take on the heavy burden of supporting a moving, active population. At some point, this stops looking like tourists merely escaping the weather. It begins looking like the weather redesigning the tourist day around them. The environment dictates the boundaries, and the infrastructure stretches to fill the void left by the unusable outdoor hours. But then, the late afternoon finally breaks. The sun drops below the skyline. The intense heat shimmer fades from the asphalt, and the artificial streetlights come on. Almost immediately, the outdoor spaces begin to breathe again. The marina restaurants fill up, the waterfronts see pedestrians returning, and the city appears to snap back to normal. The outdoor cafe seating that sat completely empty at 1 p.m. is suddenly packed with evening diners. The visual transformation is so incredibly rapid that it feels like the problem has been completely solved. Maybe Dubai simply waits until night, and the extreme weather barrier disappears. But losing the sun is not the same as losing summer. The temperature drops, but the lingering heat and humidity still exert massive pressure on the outdoor environment. Nighttime does not erase the climate challenge. It just forces the outdoor city to adapt in an entirely different way. The physical demands of the desert do not simply vanish. If you walk down toward the shoreline after dark, you will see something that does not happen in most global tourist destinations. You will find people swimming in the ocean at midnight. Dubai has established a specialized network of designated night swimming beaches, fully equipped with powerful floodlights and dedicated safety infrastructure. During their first 18 months of operation, the municipality reported approximately 1.5 million visits to these after-dark swimming zones. That massive volume of people is not just a clever tourist attraction. It is hard evidence of temporal adaptation. The visitors still want to experience the Arabian Gulf, and the coastline is still a primary economic driver for the city. They have not necessarily stopped wanting the outdoor version of Dubai. They have simply changed when they consume it. The intense midday heat removed the beach from the daytime itinerary, so the infrastructure stretched the operating hours deep into the night. The demand did not disappear. The clock moved. The city simply built a highly engineered lighting and safety system to allow the tourism economy to safely ignore the traditional boundaries of sunset. Activity that would usually peak at 2 in the afternoon now peaks under artificial illumination, completely shifting the rhythm of coastal tourism. This temporal shift creates a strange new reality where 2 entirely different versions of the same city begin to operate side by side. One Dubai loses its visible outdoor activity. Another Dubai absorbs it. If you place the 2 environments side by side, the contrast is absolute. On one side of the screen, an empty, sun-exposed cafe terrace sits quietly next to a deserted pedestrian promenade. On the other side, an indoor restaurant is operating at maximum capacity, while thousands of people navigate a heavily air-conditioned retail concourse. You have a midday beach sitting entirely empty, running parallel to a night beach, processing massive crowds under powerful artificial floodlights. Two different versions of the city are effectively operating at the exact same time. One environment is completely dictated by the extreme weather, while the other is engineered to safely ignore it. This split reality creates a highly complex economic geography for the stakeholders relying on international visitors. The hotels, the indoor entertainment centers, and the mega malls capture a massive surge in displaced daytime activity. They become the primary beneficiaries of the midday heat. But the outdoor venues, the street-level retail, and the open-air operators have to navigate a completely different environment. Less pedestrian foot traffic naturally reduces the opportunities for spontaneous outdoor interaction and unplanned spending. The outdoor economy does not necessarily fail, but it has to dramatically restructure its operations to capture revenue during the much narrower windows of early morning and late evening. If you look at how a standard winter tourist itinerary is built, it flows easily and spontaneously between different environments. You might visit the beach in the morning, walk through the historical districts of Old Dubai before lunch, shop in the afternoon, and take a desert safari before dinner. But a heat-adapted summer itinerary requires strict architectural control. The morning is spent outside before the temperature climbs. The entire midday and afternoon block is securely locked inside the massive indoor megastructures. The late afternoon becomes a transitional period of waiting inside a hotel or a taxi, and only after the sun sets does the outdoor exploration safely resume. Official summer promotional material actively highlights this exact pattern, steering visitors toward a broad mixture of indoor activities and heat-adapted nighttime experiences. The planning requires absolute precision because every transfer between locations becomes a calculated step to avoid the extreme heat. The climate is no longer just a background condition for the holiday. It is the primary architect of the schedule. A visitor may still experience everything they planned, but the sequence of those experiences is tightly controlled by the thermometer. The luxury is not complete freedom from the climate. The luxury is having enough infrastructure to negotiate with it. Dubai provides the heavy engineering required to keep the itinerary moving, but the extreme environment still dictates exactly when and where that itinerary is allowed to happen. When you observe the sheer scale of this infrastructure, it is incredibly easy to reach a false conclusion. You look at the crowds inside the malls and the night-swimming beaches, and you assume the city has completely solved the problem. The massive network of climate-controlled environments, indoor theme parks, and heavily refrigerated transit systems functions exactly as designed. The summer programming successfully keeps millions of visitors entertained and physically safe. The ability to host nearly 20 million international arrivals while mitigating extreme summer conditions is an undeniable logistical achievement. For a brief moment, it looks like a total engineering victory over the desert summer. But adaptation does not prove the heat is irrelevant. The massive scale of this adaptation actually reveals just how intense the climate pressure has become. The decision to run a marathon through retail corridors is not proof that the streets are permanently broken. It is hard evidence that the outdoor environment is temporarily too hostile to support basic human movement. The floodlights at the night beach do not mean daytime tourism has completely collapsed. They mean the daytime sun is so aggressive that the city had to invent a new category of infrastructure just to maintain access to its own water. Every indoor diversion, every air-conditioned walkway, and every shifted operating hour is a direct, highly expensive response to a massive environmental barrier. The victory is real, but it requires continuous, massive intervention to sustain the illusion of normalcy. Which brings us back to the quiet, sun-bleached pavement at 1 p.m. in August. The heat shimmer is still rising off the asphalt. The waterfront promenades are still deserted. The cafe seating is still completely exposed to the 45-degree heat. But the meaning of that exact image has entirely changed. When you first see that quiet street, the immediate interpretation is that the extreme weather has driven the tourists away. The visual absence of people on the pavement looks like a clear sign of structural failure. But the empty sidewalk was real. What was wrong was the assumption that nobody was here. The massive crowds are currently waiting behind glass doors, navigating indoor concourses, or simply resting in hotel rooms until the sun goes down. Dubai's summer does not erase tourism. It fragments the tourist day. That fragmentation happens across time, pushing outdoor activity into the early morning and deep into the night. It happens across space, pulling millions of people off the street and securely into taxis, mega malls, and indoor attractions. And it fractures the experience itself into things that can be safely consumed right now, and things that must wait until the climate boundary shifts. The city has not been abandoned. It has simply been reorganized, folding inward to protect its economic engine until the worst of the heat finally passes. If you see an almost completely empty Dubai street during the peak summer pressure zone, do not automatically conclude that the international visitors have disappeared. Look at the clock. The massive infrastructure is working exactly as it must to keep the urban economy moving. The streets will fill again, but strictly on the climate's terms. The strangest part of a Dubai summer may not be that tourists stop visiting the city. It is that extreme heat can directly influence exactly when an outdoor tourist city actually gets to behave like an outdoor tourist city. This video is for educational and analytical purposes, exploring urban adaptation, climate infrastructure, and tourism economics. It does not constitute financial, travel, or professional advice, and conditions may vary based on specific seasonal and operational changes. Would you take a cheaper Dubai holiday in August if several daytime hours had to move indoors, or would you pay more to experience the city during the cooler season?